Welcome to Moonlit Romantic, where stories bloom by candlelight, and every word is a gentle tide pulling you closer to love. Tonight, let your heart drift to Clifftide Bay, a quiet coastal town where a hardened journalist and a sunlit romance author are thrown into a collaboration neither of them asked for, but both of them just might need. This is Deadline Hearts, a story of slow burning trust, emotional healing, and finding home in the most unexpected pages. So settle in, close your eyes, and let this story carry you into a tender, moonlit dream. Chapter 1, Collision Course. The sky over Clifftide Bay looked like a watercolor painting. Soft swaths of coral and lavender stretched across the horizon, fading into the muted gold of a summer evening. Waves whispered against the shore in steady rhythm, and the briny breeze carried the scent of salt, sand, and something warm from the nearby bakery. Max Harper hated all of it. He stood at the edge of the rental house's front porch, suitcase still beside him, staring at the quaint coastal town that was now his reluctant residence for the next 6 weeks. 6 weeks, 42 days, 1,008 hours. Not that he was counting. The house was charming in that overly curated way people used to describe things on real estate listings. A cozy oceanside cottage full of inspiration and natural light. To Max, it looked like a pastel postcard that had been dipped in saccharine and stuck on the fridge of someone who used heart-shaped magnets. He tightened his grip on the suitcase handle. He was a serious journalist, or had been. Investigative reporting was in his bones. Corruption, fraud, whistleblowers, truth. He chased facts, not fiction. He unearthed secrets no one wanted to see. And now he was reduced to this. A joint book project with a romance novelist. It wasn't just insulting, it was humiliating. Max sighed, adjusted the strap of his worn satchel, and stepped inside. The cottage was cooler than expected. Wooden floors, open beam ceilings, and windows that caught the sun in lazy shafts of light. There was a vase of wildflowers on the kitchen table, and next to it, a single notebook, leather-bound with a note pinned to the cover. Max and Violet's 6 weeks. One story. Don't kill each other. Nora. Max stared at the note, jaw tight. Nora Shaw, his editor and the only person in the world who could still guilt him into anything, had insisted this was a lifeline, that his name still meant something, that publishing houses still cared if he played nice, if he collaborated, and if he stayed out of headlines long enough to rebuild his reputation. He didn't want a lifeline. He wanted control. But control had become a luxury he could no longer afford. The front door creaked open behind him. He turned, and there she was, Violet Lane. She was exactly what he expected, and somehow not at all. Her hair was swept up in a loose bun, with soft tendrils curling around her face. She wore a light sundress, the color of lemon cream, and a cardigan with a daisy pin fastened to the collar. Her canvas tote bag had the words, "Romance is revolutionary," printed in looping script. And her smile was immediate. "Oh, you must be Max," she said, crossing the threshold with a bright energy that filled the room. "Wow, This place is even cuter than it looked in the pictures. Isn't it lovely? Max gave a non-committal grunt. Violet's smile didn't falter. She set her tote on the armchair and extended her hand. Violet Lane, it's nice to meet you. He shook it briefly. Max Harper. I know, she beamed. I've read all your exposés. You write like a surgeon with a scalpel. I bet you hate adverbs. Max blinked. I hate melodrama. Violet laughed. A light, melodic sound. We're going to get along just fine. He wasn't so sure. They spent the evening dividing space, agreeing on who got which bedroom, which desk, and which side of the coffee pot. Violet brought cinnamon tea and homemade scones she claimed to have baked that morning before her flight. Max brought a bottle of aged whiskey and a collection of dog-eared case files. He insisted were reference material. Their work styles, it became clear, were opposites. Max took notes, in bullet form. Violet scribbled on index cards, in color-coded ink. Max outlined chapters by tension arc. Violet outlined them by emotional beat. By the time the sun had fully set, casting long shadows across the living room, Max was already chewing the inside of his cheek. This isn't going to work, he muttered. Violet looked up from her note cards. Because I suggested opening the book with a meet cute at a bakery instead of a murder in an alley. He gave her a flat look. Because we don't speak the same language. You speak journalism, I speak fiction. Together we could be multilingual. She wiggled her eyebrows. Max pinched the bridge of his nose. Nora said we have 6 weeks. She also said not to kill each other. That's still on the table. Violet grinned. You're grumpy. I like it. He stared at her. You like it? She shrugged. It's refreshing. Most people try to be charming. Max turned away before she could see the faintest twitch at the corner of his mouth. Later, in the quiet of his bedroom, Max stared at the ceiling. He'd been here for less than 12 hours, and already he felt off-kilter. Not because of the town, or the sea air, or the damn wildflowers, but because Violet Lane didn't make sense. She was supposed to be all glitter and gloss, formulaic, shallow, breezy. Instead, she was smart, observant, disarming, and annoyingly good at catching him off guard. He closed his eyes and tried to conjure the hard lines of a world he knew better, black and white, right and wrong, facts over feelings. But all he saw was her daisy pin and the way her smile had softened when she saw the sea. The next morning began with rain, soft, steady, and silver. Violet was already in the kitchen, barefoot, humming as she poured 2 mugs of coffee. Max hesitated in the doorway. She handed him a mug without looking. I made it strong. You look like someone who judges weak coffee. He took it. I judge a lot of things. She smiled, sipping hers. I know. They settled into their respective corners of the living room. The couch became Violet's nest of sticky notes and throw pillows. Max staked out the armchair, a lap desk across his knees, laptop open. The story, whatever it would be, had yet to take shape. So, Violet began, tapping a pen against her chin. What if our main character is a burned-out reporter who inherits a failing newspaper and finds an old love letter that changes everything? Max arched a brow. 2 on the nose. All right. What about a romance novelist who takes a sabbatical in a sleepy beach town and meets a grumpy stranger with a past? He narrowed his eyes, suspiciously autobiographical. Violet grinned. You noticed? He sighed. Can we start with theme? Love, she said immediately. Obviously. Max rolled his eyes. Truth. Her eyes twinkled. Let's compromise. Love as truth. Max muttered into his coffee. This is going to be painful. But it wasn't. Not entirely. By midday, they had a rough premise, 3 potential character names, and a disagreement about whether a first kiss should happen in Chapter 5 or Chapter 8. Violet argued for tension. Max argued for realism. You're forgetting the magic, she said. You're ignoring the mess, he replied. But their banter sparked something. Not frustration. Flow. Even Max could feel it. The subtle give and take of 2 minds circling the same flame. Different shapes of kindling, feeding a fire neither had expected. That night, Max wandered outside. The ocean was a dark ribbon beyond the dunes, and stars blinked overhead in the hush of a world half asleep. He should have felt trapped. Instead, he felt tethered, not tightly, just enough to keep him from floating away. Back inside, Violet was curled on the couch, notebook in her lap, glasses slipping down her nose. Her hair was loose now, falling over her shoulder in soft waves. She looked up. You all right? Max hesitated. Then, do you ever write characters based on people you know? All the time, she said easily, but never directly, just impressions, fragments. He nodded. I don't, he said. Too personal, too risky. She tilted her head. But isn't the truth always a little risky? He didn't answer. Instead, he poured himself a glass of water, sat across from her, and opened his laptop again. They rode until midnight, side by side, and for the first time in a long time, Max didn't feel like he was chasing a deadline. He felt like he was part of something worth waiting for. Chapter 2. First Drafts and Friction. The 3rd day in Clifftide Bay began with a sharp knock on the cottage's screen door and the scent of ocean brine curling through the morning mist. Max was already at the table with his 2nd cup of coffee, and his sleeves rolled up, hunched over his laptop like it owed him money. He looked up, expecting a delivery, or maybe a neighbor. Instead, Violet breezed in, holding a plate of croissants, her cardigan sleeves pushed to her elbows, and a pencil tucked behind her ear. "Peace offering," she said, "for yesterday." Max narrowed his eyes. Yesterday? When I said your main character felt emotionally constipated. He took a croissant. He is emotionally constipated. She grinned. Yes, but I shouldn't have said it while you were mid-sentence. He shook his head. You said it during my sentence. Well, Violet said brightly, at least I waited until the dependent clause. Max tried not to laugh, but the corner of his mouth betrayed him. Their working routine began to take shape. By mid-morning, they'd settle into their corners, Violet surrounded by a scatter of colored pens and tea mugs. Max anchored behind his laptop, typing in surgical silence. They wrote separately at first, carving out the world of their co-created story in parallel columns. Violet tackled the love interest's backstory with a poetic flair, while Max broke down plot threads with a military sense of structure. Somehow, it started to work, until it didn't. I don't understand why he walks away in Chapter 4, Violet said, frowning at Max's printed pages. It feels like emotional whiplash. He's scared, Max said, leaning over the kitchen counter. People do irrational things when they're scared. Violet crossed her arms. But walking away doesn't create romantic tension. It kills it. Max met her gaze. It reflects real life. People leave. But not in romance, she said. In romance, they grow. They learn. They stay. Max's voice was quiet. Not always. Violet softened. Max. He turned away. Let's table it. Okay, she said gently. But you should know, leaving doesn't make your character strong. Letting them stay, that's the hard part. They took a break after lunch, both in need of fresh air and distance. Violet walked to the market and bought peaches from a smiling vendor who insisted she take one extra for luck. Max drove the winding coastal road until it curved around the lighthouse. He parked the car, climbed the trail, and stood watching the sea smash itself against the rocks. He didn't like talking about his past, not with editors, not with colleagues, and especially not with someone who wrote about love with soft focus certainty. But Violet, she had a way of asking questions without pressure, of seeing things he didn't want to show. It unnerved him. It intrigued him. It made him want to write more carefully. And, strangely, more honestly. That evening, they agreed to work outside. The cottage's back deck overlooked a bluff, scattered with seagrass and clover. The ocean was calm, glassy with evening light, and the breeze was soft enough not to scatter Violet's index cards. They sat across from each other, laptops open, mugs steaming. Can I ask you something? Violet said after a while. Max looked up. That's never stopped you before. She smiled. What was your last article about? The one that got pulled? He hesitated. Corporate malpractice, he said finally. A tech firm siphoning environmental data to manipulate zoning approvals. I had sources, documents, everything. And they buried it. Legally, publicly. My name was on the byline. Violet didn't respond right away. Did you regret writing it? She asked. No, he said quietly. But I regret that the truth didn't matter. She leaned back in her chair, watching him with something softer than curiosity. Maybe it still does. Max met her gaze. There was no judgment in her eyes, only a gentle kind of conviction. They returned to the story. That night, their characters finally kissed, awkwardly, reluctantly, under the canopy of a storm-battered gazebo. Max wrote the scene's frame, the rain, the shadows, the impulse. Violet wrote the breath between sentences. Together, it felt like something real. When they reread it aloud, the silence after was different. Not uncomfortable, charged. And then Violet said very quietly, "You write longing well." Max didn't answer. He didn't need to. Later, Max stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing their mugs. Violet stepped beside him, reaching for a towel. Their hands brushed. Neither moved away. The air was thick with something unnamed. "I'll see you in the morning," she said, barely above a whisper. Max's voice was hoarse. "Yeah." She left the room, her footsteps soft on the stairs. And Max stood alone, staring out at the stars, wondering how a woman who believed in happily ever afters was starting to rewrite the chapters he'd already closed. Chapter 3: Plot Twists and Past Wounds. The fifth morning in Clifftide Bay arrived with fog pressing close to the windows and the soft thrum of rain on the rooftop. Max woke before dawn, his internal clock tuned to the silence of early hours. He brewed coffee in the dim kitchen and stared out at the water until the fog lifted just enough to reveal the glint of waves. He didn't realize Violet had come downstairs until she cleared her throat behind him. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked softly. Max turned. Her voice was still scratchy with sleep. Her hair pulled up messily, oversized sweatshirt falling past her hands. He nodded. Too many words in my head. "I have a remedy for that," she said. "Impromptu field research day." He blinked. "What kind of research?" "The charming small-town romance kind," she replied, already reaching for her tote bag. "Come on, it'll be fun." Max looked skeptical. "Max," Violet said, with a grin, "you've been locked in your own brain for 3 days straight. You need a plot twist." He sighed. "Fine, but if there are goats involved, I'm leaving." "No goats," she promised. just stories. Their first stop was the Clifftide Historical Museum, a tiny one-room building with creaky floors, newspaper clippings from the early 1900s, and a volunteer docent named Pearl who offered them lemon drops from a candy dish. "This place is a gold mine," Violet whispered as she leaned over a dusty display about shipwrecks and lighthouse keepers. "Did you know the old inn down by the harbor used to be a speakeasy?" Max peered over her shoulder. "Are you trying to insert bootleggers into our novel?" "Only if they kiss dramatically in the cellar." He snorted. "Of course." They lingered longer than expected, reading, taking notes, laughing over exaggerated local ghost stories. For a moment, Max forgot the weight of deadlines, the sharp edges of the city, and the constant need to prove himself. He just felt lighter. Next, they stopped at the Bookshop Cafe, on the edge of town, salt and ink, with walls of worn paperbacks and mugs the size of flower pots. They sat by the window, sipping hazelnut lattes and scribbling character ideas on napkins. "What if," Violet began, tapping her pen, "our heroine is afraid of falling in love because she thinks people always leave, and our hero is afraid to stay because he believes he ruins things." Max paused. "That's too close," he murmured. She looked up. "Too close to what?" He didn't answer immediately. "Let's just say I've known both of those people." Violet set her pen down. "You don't have to talk about it, Max. But if you ever want to, I'll listen." He nodded once. That was all he could give. But something in her expression told him it was enough. They walked back along the shoreline as the sky began to clear. Max carried a bag of books. Violet carried a dandelion she'd plucked from a patch by the docks. "Did you ever think," she asked, twirling the stem between her fingers, "that maybe your writing could change someone the way their story changed you?" "I don't know," Max said. "I always thought of writing as exposure, illumination, not transformation." She smiled. "Then maybe it's time you wrote a different kind of truth." Back at the cottage, they settled in for another writing session. This time, they sat together on the couch, their knees almost touching, laptops open, the fire crackling low in the hearth. Violet wrote a chapter from the heroine's point of view, a quiet moment of confession where she shared her fear of being someone's second choice. Max read over her shoulder and was struck by the vulnerability in the lines. "You wrote that quickly," he said softly. She shrugged. "Sometimes the things that hurt are the easiest to write." He looked at her then. Really looked. "Were you ever someone's second choice?" Violet hesitated. "Yes," she said. "Once. And I stayed too long trying to become their first." Max didn't know what to say. So he wrote instead. His chapter came in a rush, a scene where the hero, emotionally guarded and scared of history repeating itself, chose to stay when it would have been easier to walk away. When he finished, he handed the laptop to her without speaking She read it slowly, her fingers curled around the edges. Then she looked at him, eyes soft. "That's the most honest thing you've written so far." They didn't write again that night. Instead, they talked about everything and nothing. Max told her about his brother, the one who died in college, and how no one in his family ever quite recovered. Violet told him about her mother's illness and how writing romance gave her hope when everything else felt like it was slipping away. They spoke until midnight, then 1 o'clock, then 2. At some point, Violet leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. He didn't move, didn't speak, just sat there, letting the warmth of her presence soften the edges of a world he hadn't realized had grown so sharp. The next morning, Max found a note on the kitchen counter. "Gone for a walk. Needed air. Breakfast scones in the oven. Don't judge the raisins." He smiled. Just a little. Then he sat down at the table and began outlining their next chapter. The one where the hero finally stopped running. Chapter 4. Rewrite the rules. By the start of the second week in Clifftide Bay, the manuscript had become more than a collaboration. It had become a mirror. Each scene felt like peeling away another layer of fiction, of truth, of themselves. Violet had started leaving post-it notes on Max's drafts, not just the usual edits, but ones with phrases like, "Love can be fierce too," or "Don't be afraid to let him feel joy." Sometimes she drew tiny hearts in the margins. Sometimes Max pretended not to smile when he saw them. He still wrote in short, precise sentences. But now there were lines of tenderness tucked between the tension. Violet noticed. She noticed everything. They spent the afternoon at the harbor. Violet said she needed to absorb coastal atmosphere. For a beach scene, Max came along under the guise of research, though he left his notebook untouched the entire time. They walked the dock, watching fishing boats sway on the tide. Max pointed out the rust patterns on the hulls, and Violet listened with the same attention she gave to poetry. Later, they sat on a bench sharing a cone of vanilla and sea salt caramel. "You've changed," she said softly, watching him as the breeze tangled her hair. Max blinked. "Excuse me." "Your writing," she clarified. "It's less guarded, less like armor." He glanced down at the cone. "Maybe I'm tired of armor." Violet studied him. "It's okay to be soft, Max." "I'm not soft." She raised an eyebrow. "You literally wrote a paragraph about the way his heart skipped when she tucked her hair behind her ear." He looked away. "That was research." She laughed, low and delighted. "Sure it was." Back at the cottage, a storm rolled in. The sky darkened, wind howled at the shutters, and rain lashed against the windows with wild energy. The power flickered once, then went out entirely, leaving the house in a hush of candlelight and thunder. Violet lit 3 candles and brought a quilt into the living room. Max uncorked the bottle of wine they'd been ignoring all week and poured 2 glasses. They sat across from each other on the rug, barefoot, with the storm crackling around them. Truth or dare? Violet asked suddenly. Max snorted. What are we, 15? Humor me. He rolled his eyes. Truth. She tilted her head. What's the hardest thing you've ever written? Max stared into his glass. An obituary, he said finally. For my brother. Violet's breath caught. I didn't know. It was a hit and run, Max continued. He was walking back from a concert. No witnesses, no arrests. I was in college, studying political science. I switched to journalism the next week. Violet reached across the space and touched his hand. I'm so sorry, Max. He nodded, not pulling away. They sat like that for a long moment, rain washing against the windows, thunder echoing softly overhead. Then Violet said, Truth or dare? Max exhaled. Truth again. She smiled faintly. What do you want most right now? His gaze met hers, and for the first time in weeks, maybe years, he didn't deflect. You? Violet's breath hitched. Is that okay? He asked quietly. She crossed the space between them, slowly, carefully, and rested her palm against his cheek. Yes. Then she kissed him. It wasn't a grand, sweeping kiss. It was soft, curious, the kind of kiss that unfolded like a secret and settled like a promise. When they pulled apart, Violet rested her forehead against his. Max whispered, We're breaking the rules. She smiled. Then let's rewrite them. They didn't rush anything after that. There were no declarations, just subtle shifts, fingers brushing as they passed each other in the kitchen, soft glances during writing sessions, the comfort of shared silence. Their characters deepened too. The heroine finally confessed her fear of not being enough. The hero admitted he didn't know how to be loved without guilt. Together, they found a way forward. So did Max and Violet. At night, they read aloud to each other. Not just their story, but favorite passages from novels they loved. Max found himself borrowing her copy of Persuasion and underlining lines he never would have paused over before. Violet tucked a note into the margin. I see you softening. He pretended not to notice. But peace, like story arcs, always bends toward complication. And on the 15th day, an email arrived. Max read it at the kitchen counter, while Violet was upstairs folding laundry. The subject line made his stomach drop. Harper. Investigation revisited. The body of the message was short. Max, a source from the Revritech case, just came forward. You were right. Want to talk? Lucas. He stared at the screen, The Revertech investigation had cost him everything: his reputation, his career, his peace. Now it might finally be vindicated, but it also meant choices. Hard ones. The story would take time, focus, and full dedication, which meant stepping away from Clifftide, from Violet, from what they were building word by word. He didn't tell her that night. He couldn't. She smiled over her tea, read him the line she'd written that day. He didn't need to rescue her. He just needed to stay. And he felt something twist in his chest because he wasn't sure he could stay. And worse, he wasn't sure she'd forgive him if he left. Chapter 5. The final chapter. The sky was the color of parchment the next morning, soft and unread, waiting. Max stood at the bluff alone, the sea stretching endlessly before him, gulls circling above. His phone was heavy in his pocket. He hadn't answered Lucas's email yet, but the words kept playing on a loop in his mind. You were right. Want to talk? He'd fought so long to hear those words. Now that they were here, why did they feel like a weight instead of a win? Behind him, the cottage windows glowed with morning light. He could picture Violet inside, barefoot, probably humming, pouring cinnamon tea into her favorite mug. He'd come to know her routines like rhythms, soft and sure. He'd also come to know what it felt like to belong somewhere, to someone. And that made everything harder. He didn't tell her at breakfast or at lunch when she pulled him into a kiss between paragraphs and whispered, "You write like someone who's learning how to stay." Instead, he waited until dusk, when the manuscript was nearly complete and the end hovered like a heartbeat between them. They sat on the porch steps, watching fireflies wink in the garden. "There's something I need to tell you," Max said, his voice low. Violet's head tilted slightly, her expression unreadable. "I got an email yesterday from one of my old contacts. The Revertech case. It's back. There's a chance to finish what I started." Violet blinked. "That's good, right?" He nodded. "It could be, but it means I'd have to leave. Soon. Maybe tomorrow." She didn't speak. The air between them was full of waves and waiting. "I wanted you to hear it from me," he said. "Not from Nora, or the news, or... Are you going?" she asked quietly. He looked at her, searching her face. "I don't know." Violet pressed her hands together in her lap. "I won't ask you to stay, Max. You've always had your compass pointed at the truth, but I need to tell you something, and I need you to really hear it." He nodded once. She took a breath. "When we started this, I thought it would just be a book, a contract, maybe a challenge. But then you started writing like someone who'd forgotten how not to feel. And somewhere along the way, I started reading between the lines." She looked at him, her voice steady. "I love you. Not the idea of you, not the writer. You. And if you go, I'll survive. But don't think for 1 second it won't matter." Max felt something break open inside his chest. Not pain. Release. He reached for her hand. I've spent so long chasing truth, he said. But I think I was running from the one thing I never had the nerve to write down. He paused. I love you too. The next day, Max answered the email. He told Lucas the truth, that he needed a few more weeks, and then he'd talk. Because this story, the one he hadn't meant to write, wasn't finished yet. They turned in the final manuscript the following Monday. Nora called them within hours. I cried, she said, voice thick with emotion. Then I laughed. Then I poured a glass of wine and read it again. Max and Violet sat on the couch, curled into each other, the laptop still glowing between them. You did it, Nora said. Together. Violet smiled. We really did. After the call ended, Max pulled Violet closer. You know, he murmured, we could write another one. Another book? He nodded. Or another chapter, or another beginning. Violet grinned. Can it have a bakery in it? Max pressed a kiss to her temple. Anything you want. That evening, they walked along the shore. The waves kissed the sand. The stars blinked awake. And for the first time in years, Max didn't feel the pull of a deadline. He felt the promise of forever, unfolding slowly, sentence by sentence. 6 months later, the book hit the bestseller list on its 3rd day in print. Readers called it a love story, wrapped in a reckoning, unexpectedly tender, and an ode to what happens when opposites don't just attract, they listen. Max and Violet did interviews side by side. Max spoke less than Violet, but when he did, it was always honest, always true. They moved into a little house 2 blocks from the sea, one with creaky stairs, wide windows, and a writing room painted in pale gold. On the bookshelf sat a leather-bound notebook with a handwritten inscription. To fee, for rewriting everything I thought I knew. M, and beneath that, Deadline Hearts by Violet Lane and Max Harper. The only deadline they chased now was sunrise. Thank you for spending your evening with Moonlit Romantic. In the quiet corners of Clifftide Bay, we watched 2 hearts rewrite their pasts, not with perfect sentences, but with honest ones. In a world built on deadlines, they found something far more lasting, a love worth waiting for. A truth worth staying for. If Deadline Hearts moved you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who still believes in second chances and in love that arrives right on time. Until next time, sleep gently, dream deeply, and remember, some stories begin only when you're brave enough to write a new ending.